There was a time when we didn't think twice about certain things. I can still remember the feeling of walking through an airport with my daughter when she was 7 years old. She held my hand loosely, swinging her small backpack, excited about visiting her grandmother in California. We arrived early, but not too early, maybe 45 minutes before boarding. That felt like plenty of time. The terminal was bright and open. People walked slowly. Families sat on benches eating sandwiches they had brought from home. No one checked them. No one asked. A man in a business suit read a newspaper, his briefcase resting open beside him on the floor. Children ran between the rows of seats, laughing, while their parents chatted without looking over their shoulders every few seconds. I remember my daughter asking if she could go look at the small bookstore near our gate. Premier, c'est yes. I watched her walk away, maybe 30 feet, browsing the shelves alone. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't even feel the need to stand up. I just watched her, casually, the way you watch a bird land on a branch. Present, but not worried. Before we delve deeper into this story, if this type of narrative resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll always be notified whenever a new story like this is shared here. These are simple, human accounts, meant to be listened to calmly perhaps when you need them most. Back then, the world didn't feel quiet. It felt open. I lived in a small town in Pennsylvania. Nothing special. A main street with a pharmacy, a diner, a post office. Everyone knew everyone, but not in a suffocating way. It was just normal. You'd see the same faces at the grocery store, at church, at the school pickup line. You'd wave. You'd stop and talk for a few minutes about nothing important. The weather. A new restaurant opening to towns over. Someone's grandson starting college. There was a rhythm to life that felt steady, predictable, maybe, but in a good way. Première workade part-time the library. It was a quiet detritus. I'd check out books, help people find things, re-shelf returns. Sometimes I'd sit at the desk during slow hours and just read. Non Manded, the head librarian, Margaret, was 63 and had worked there for 30 years. She moved slowly, spoke softly, and trusted that the world would keep turning the way it always had. I think about Margaret sometimes now. My husband, Tom, worked in sales. He traveled a lot. 2 or 3 times a month, he'd pack a small suitcase, kiss me and our daughter goodbye, and drive to the airport. He'd be gone for 2 or 3 days. I never worried. It was just part of life. He'd call from the hotel at night, tell me about his meetings, ask how our daughter's day at school had been. It was routine, comfortable. I remember one time he called from a hotel in Chicago. He told me he had walked to a deep dish pizza place after his meetings and sat at the bar alone, eating and watching a baseball game on the TV above the counter. He said it was peaceful. He sounded relaxed. I remember feeling happy that he had that moment. I didn't know then those small mean what permanent. Our daughter, Emily, was in 2nd grade. She had a best friend named Sarah. They were inseparable. After school, they'd ride their bikes up and down our street, helmets buckled loosely, laughing about things only 7-year-old girls find funny. I'd watch them from the kitchen window while I made dinner. I didn't follow them. I didn't time them. I just knew they'd come back when the street lights started to flicker on. That was the rule. Be home before the lights come on. And they always were. I think about that now. How much freedom we gave them without even realizing it was freedom. It wasn't a choice we made consciously. It was just the way things were. The neighborhood felt safe because it had always felt safe. We didn't question it. On weekends, Tom and I would sometimes drive to the city. Philadelphia was about an hour away. We'd park on its side's croc stop at the cafe. Maybe so you. The city felt alive, but not overwhelming. People moved quickly, but no one seemed tense. You could sit on a bench in Rittenhouse Square and just watch the world go by. Students, couples, business people on lunch breaks, dogs on leashes, everyone going somewhere, but no one in a panic. I remember one Saturday afternoon, we were sitting outside a small Italian restaurant, waiting for a table. There was a street musician playing guitar nearby. People dropped coins into his open case as they passed. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, walked up and stood right in front of the musician, staring at him with wide eyes. The boy's mother stood a few feet away, smiling, letting her son be curious. The musician winked at the boy and played a little louder. The boy clapped. It was such a small moment. But it felt normal, easy. I didn't know then that ease was something you could lose without even noticing it leave. At home, our evenings were simple. Dinner together. Emily doing homework at the kitchen table while I cleaned up. Tom reading the newspaper in the living room. Sometimes we'd watch television. The news, maybe, but not for long. It didn't dominate the night. It was just background. We'd switch to a sitcom or a game show. We'd laugh. Emily would fall asleep on the couch and Tom would carry her to bed. I think about those nights now. How unremarkable they seemed. How little I appreciated the fact that nothing was wrong. There was a mailman named Frank who delivered to our street for years. He knew everyone's name. He'd stop and chat if you were outside. He'd pet the dogs. He'd ask about vacations or birthday parties. He once told me he loved his job because it let him be part of people's lives in a small way. He said he felt lucky. I wonder if Frank still feels that way now. Looking back, I realize we lived in a kind of bubble. Not because we were sheltered or naive, but because the world simply hadn't shown us yet that the bubble could break. We believed in patterns. We believed that tomorrow would look like today, that next year would look like this year. We made plans without thinking twice. We bought plane tickets months in advance. We assumed we'd be able to go. I remember planning a trip to visit Tom's brother in Colorado. We booked the flights in June for a trip in October. Emily was so excited. She had never seen mountains before. We printed out the confirmation and stuck it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Every time she walked by, she'd touch it and smile. We didn't think anything could get in the way. And for a long time, nothing did. But there's something I've learned since then, something I didn't understand back in those years when life felt so open and predictable. I've learned that the feeling of safety is not the same thing as safety itself. And that sometimes the world changes in a single day, and you spend the rest of your life remembering what it felt like before. For those who lived through it, there is a day that quietly divides everything. I don't talk about it often. Not because it's too painful, though sometimes it is, but because I've noticed that when you mention it, people's faces change. They nod in a certain way. Their eyes shift. They know immediately what you mean. And there's a heaviness that settles into the conversation, even if neither of you says much more. It's a shared knowledge, a collective scar. I was at work that morning, Tuesday. The library opened at 9, and I had arrived a few minutes early to unlock the doors and turn on the lights. Margaret was already there, brewing coffee in the small staff room. She always arrived first. She said she liked the quiet before the day began. I remembered the smell of that coffee. I remember the soft sound of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I remember thinking about what I needed to do that day. Return a cart of books to the shelves. Call a publisher about a delayed order. Help set up for story time at 10:30. Ordinary things. Emily had gone to school that morning like always. Tom had left 2 days earlier for a business trip to Atlanta. He was supposed to fly home that afternoon. I had reminded him the night before, during our phone call, to pick up milk on his way home from the airport. We were almost out. He laughed and said he'd try to remember. That was the last normal conversation we had for a very long time. Around 9:15, Margaret came out of the staff room holding her mug. She looked pale. She said, "Ruth, you need to come see this." I followed her into the room. She had turned on the small television we kept on a shelf in the corner. We almost never used it. It was old, with a boxy frame and antennas that had to be adjusted by hand. But that morning, the picture was clear enough. I stood there, holding a stack of books I had been about to shelve, and I watched the screen. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Smoke, a building, people on the street, looking up. A reporter's voice, fast and uncertain, trying to explain something that didn't make sense. Margaretse et Wandsey York. I thought she meant a small plane, an accident, something terrible, but contained, explainable. And then, while we were standing there, we saw the second plane. I don't remember dropping the books, but Margaret told me later that I did. She said they fell out of my hands and scattered across the floor, and I didn't even look down. I just kept staring at the screen. It's strange, the details you remember and the ones you don't. I remember the color of Margaret's mug. It was light, blue with a crack along the handle. I remember the way her hand shook slightly as she set it down on the table. I remember the sound of the television, the reporter's voice breaking, pausing, then continuing. But I don't remember what I said. I don't remember if I said anything at all. Time became strange after that. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like seconds. I know we stood there for a long time, watching. Other staff members arrived. They came into the room, saw the television, and stopped moving. No one opened the library. No one thought to. We just stood together, watching something we couldn't fully comprehend. À some point, our thermo at Hamley School was, did they know what was happening? Were they telling the children? I thought about Tom. He was supposed to fly home that afternoon from Atlanta. But all the plans yet, but première felt-it all going to stop. Everything was going to stop. I tried to call him. The phone lines were jammed. I tried again and again. Nothing. I tried to call Emily's school. Same thing. Busy signal. Silence. Busy signal. I felt my chest tighten. A pressure I had never felt before. Not panic, exactly, but something close. A sensation that the ground beneath me was shifting and I didn't know how to steady myself. Margaret touched my shoulder. She said, "She's safe." Emily's safe. The school won't let anything happen. I nodded, but I didn't feel sure. Arundmide Einrally School. Other parents were already there, standing outside the main entrance, waiting. No one was supposed to pick up their children early, but no one cared about the rules that day. When Emily came out, she looked confused. She didn't know why I was there. She asked if something was wrong. I knelt down and hugged her. I held her longer than I usually did. She squirmed a little and said, "Mom, what's happening?" I didn't know how to answer. So premier juillet, Lindgor me asked again. I told her something had happened in New York, that a lot of people were hurt, that Daddy was okay, But he might not be able to come home today because the planes weren't flying. She was quiet for a moment. THNSHC, is it like in them? No, sweetie. It's real. She looked out the window and didn't ask anything else. When we got home, I turned on the television. I don't know why. I couldn't stop watching, even though every image made me feel worse. Even though I wanted to turn it off, I couldn't. Emily sat beside me on the couch. She didn't really understand what she was seeing. She asked questions I couldn't answer. Why did the building fall down? Where did all those people go? Is Daddy's plane going to fall? I tried to reassure her. I tried to sound calm, but my voice didn't sound like my own. Tom finally called around for in the afternoon. The relief I felt hearing his voice was so overwhelming that I started crying before he even said hello. He said he was fine. He was stuck in Atlanta. All flights were grounded. He didn't know when he'd be able to come home. Maybe a few days, maybe longer. He said the airport was chaos. People crying, people angry, people just sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. He asked if Emily and I were okay. Premier c'est yes, but I don't think I sounded convincing. He said, Ruth, everything's going to be okay. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me had already shifted. I didn't say it out loud, but I remember thinking, how do you know? How does anyone know anymore? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the images in my mind. The smoke, the people running, the towers falling. Ove en ove. I thought about all the people who had woken up that morning the same way I had, who had made coffee, who had kissed their families goodbye, who had believed the day would be ordinary. And I thought about how many of them never came home. The next few days blurred together. I stopped going to work. The library closed temporarily. No one knew what else might happen. Rumors prédit another attack. More planes than we didn't know what to believe. Tom finally made it home 5 days later. He had rented a car and driven from Atlanta to Pennsylvania. 14 hours. He arrived late at night, exhausted, his eyes red and hollow. Emily ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. He held her for a long time. Then he looked at me over her head, and I saw something in his face I had never seen before. Fear, not the sharp, immediate kind, but the slow, creeping kind. The kind that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. In the weeks that followed, life tried to return to normal, but it didn't. Not really. The library reopened. I went back to work. Emily went back to school. Tom went back to his sales trips, though he hated flying now. Every time he boarded a plane, he'd call me right before takeoff just to hear my voice. Just in case. I hated that phrase, just in case. It became part of our language, part of how we thought. Many people remember where they were when the world shifted. I was in a small staff room, holding a stack of books, watching a television screen that showed me something I could never unsee. After that day in September, life slowly changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in small, quiet ways that accumulated over time until one day I looked around and realized the world I had known was gone. And I couldn't remember exactly when I had lost it. Airports stopped, feeling like places you pass through. That was one of the first things I noticed. The change was gradual, but unmistakable. We tellement everything about air travel different, have more complicated, more exhausting. The next time I flew, it must have been 6 or 7 months later, to visit my sister in Oregon. I arrived at the airport 3 hours early. Not because I wanted to, because I had to, Because everyone said you had to now. The line for security stretched back so far I couldn't see the end of it. People stood with their shoes in their hands, their belts coiled in their bags, their laptops out and visible. Children cried. Elderly passengers struggled to undress themselves quickly enough. Everyone looked tired before they had even reached their gate. I remember standing in that line, barefoot on the cold airport floor, holding my shoes and feeling a kind of humiliation I had never associated with travel before. It wasn't that the security itself was wrong. I understood why it existed. But something about the process made me feel less like a person and more like a potential threat. And I hated that feeling. When I finally reached the gate, I sat down and looked around. The terminal was quieter than I remembered. People didn't chat with strangers the way they used to. Kept their heads there, watched it with Twick, nerveux glance. A man in a turban walked by, and I saw several people follow him with their eyes until he disappeared into a restroom. I felt ashamed that I had noticed. Ashamed that some part of me had done the same thing. That's what fear does. It changes the way you see people, even when you don't want it to. Tom's job became harder. He still traveled, but every trip took more out of him. He'd come home looking drained, not just from the work, but from the airports, the delays, the constant low-level anxiety that had become part of flying. One night, after a particularly rough trip to Denver, he sat at the kitchen table and said, "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Every time I get on a plane, I think about it. Every time. I look around at the other passengers. I watch the flight attendants. I listen to every sound the engines make. I can't relax anymore. I used to sleep on flights. Now I just sit there, waiting for it to be over. I didn't know what to say. So I just reached across the table and held his hand. He looked at me and said, 'Do you ever feel like we're all just pretending things are normal?' I nodded because I did feel that way all the time. Emily was growing up in a different world than the one I had imagined for her. She was 9 now, then 10, then 11. And with each passing year, I watched her lose a kind of innocence I hadn't even realized was precious until it was gone. At school, they had lockdown drills. The teacher would lock the door, turn off the lights, and the children would sit silently in the corner, away from the windows. Emily told me about it casually one day, the way she might tell me about a math quiz. I asked her if it scared her. She shrugged and said, "Not really. We do it all the time." That answer scared me more than if she had said yes. She stopped riding her bike freely around the neighborhood, not because I forbade it, but because fewer kids were outside. Parents were more cautious. Playdates became scheduled and supervised. The casual, unstructured freedom of childhood, the kind I had taken for granted, quietly disappeared. I tried not to be overprotective. I didn't want fear to rule my parenting, but it was hard. Every time she left the house, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if? What if something happens? What if she's not safe? What if this is the moment everything changes again?" I hated that voice, but I couldn't silence it. The news followed us everywhere. That was another change. Before, the news had been something you could choose to engage with or ignore. You could watch the evening broadcast or skip it, read the newspaper or leave it folded on the table. But now it was inescapable. Televisions in waiting rooms, screens in airports, headlines on every website, scrolling tickers at the bottom of every channel, updates, alerts, breaking news. always breaking. At first, I tried to stay informed. I felt like it was my responsibility to know what was happening. Tout me prépare et threats. But after a while, it became too much. The constant stream of fear, the debates, the anger division. It was me to avoiding it. I'd walk past the television at work without stopping. I'd close the browser window when a news site loaded. I'd turn off the radio in the car. Margaret noticed. One day, she asked me if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just tired. She nodded slowly and said, "It's hard, isn't it? Living like this." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Always waiting for the next terrible thing." I looked at her and realized she looked older than she had a few years ago. We all did. The neighborhood changed too. Slowly, subtly, but it changed. Frank, the mailman, retired. His replacement was younger, faster, less talkative. He didn't stop to chat. He didn't pet the dogs. He just delivered the mail and moved on. People put up fences. Not everywhere, but enough that you noticed. Houses that had once felt open and welcoming now had gates, cameras, security system signs staked into the front lawn. We installed one ourselves. Tom insisted. He said it would help him sleep better when he was traveling. I didn't argue, but I remember the day the technician came to set it up. He walked through our house, pointing out vulnerabilities, windows that could be broken, doors that weren't reinforced, blind spots where someone could approach unseen. By the time he left, I felt less safe than I had before he arrived. That night, I stood in the kitchen and looked at the small keypad mounted by the back door. A red light blinked steadily. Armed, protected, but I didn't feel protected. I felt watched. The small Italian restaurant in Philadelphia where Tom and I used to go closed down. I don't know why exactly. Maybe business dropped off. Maybe the owner retired. But when we drove into the city one Saturday and walked past the spot, it was empty. The windows were papered over. The sign was gone. We stood there for a moment, staring at the vacant space, and I felt an unexpected sadness. It wasn't just the restaurant. It was what it represented. A piece of the life we used to have. A memory of ease. Tom said, "Should we find somewhere else?" I said, "Maybe another time." But we never did. We didn't lose joy, but we lost ease. That's the best way I can describe it. We still laughed. We still celebrated birthdays and holidays. We still went to movies and had dinners with friends. Life continued. But underneath it all was a tension that hadn't been there before. A tightness, a awareness. You could see it in the way people moved through the world. A little faster, a little more guarded, a little less open. I saw it at the grocery store. People who used to smile and make small talk now just nodded briefly and moved on. Conversations felt shorter, more transactional. I saw it at church. Attendance dropped. The pews that used to be full were half empty. I asked Pastor Graham about it once, and he sighed and said, "People are struggling with faith, with hope. I don't blame them. I saw it in myself. I used to invite neighbors over for dinner without much planning. Casual, spontaneous gatherings. But I stopped doing that. It felt like too much effort. Like I didn't have the energy to be hospitable the way I used to be." Tom noticed. He said, "You don't seem like yourself anymore." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You used to be lighter, happier. You used to sing while you cooked. I hadn't even realized I had stopped." One evening, Emily asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. She was 12 by then. She said, "Mom, do you think the world is a bad place?" I looked at her. Surprised, I asked her why she was asking. She said, "Everyone at school talks about all the bad things. Wars, terrorism, shootings. It feels like nothing is safe anymore." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to reassure her that the world was good, that people were kind, that she didn't need to be afraid. But I couldn't, because I wasn't sure I believed it myself anymore. So I said, "There are bad things, but there are good things too. You have to look for them." She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that my answer hadn't helped. That night, I lay awake, thinking about what I should have said, what I wished I believed. Tom and I talked less, not because we were fighting, but because we were both so tired. Tired of worrying, tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of carrying a weight we couldn't name. Some nights, we'd sit in the living room together, the television on, but neither of us really watching it. Just two people existing in the same space, too exhausted to connect. I missed him, even though he was right there. I missed the version of us that used to stay up late talking about nothing important, that used to laugh easily, that used to feel hopeful about the future. I wondered if we'd ever get that back. Years passed. Emily grew into a teenager. She became more independent, more distant. I told myself it was normal, adolescence. But I also wondered if part of it was the world she had grown up in, a world that had taught her to be cautious. D'autres lest exchange jobs. He took a position that didn't require travel. He said it was for practical reasons, better pay, more stability. But I knew the real reason. He couldn't handle the airports anymore. The stress, the fear. I was relieved, but I also felt sad, because it felt like another loss. Another piece of the life we used to have quietly surrendered. Margaret retired from the library. Her last day was on a Friday in June. We had a small party for her, cake, cards, a framed photograph of the staff. When it was over and everyone had left, she and I sat in the staff room alone. She looked around at the shelves, the old television in the corner, the coffee maker she had used every morning for 30 years. She said, "I thought I'd feel happy, but I just feel tired." I understood exactly what she meant. She looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about how different things used to be?" I nodded. She said, "I don't think we'll ever get that back." That feeling. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't because I thought she was right. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from living through something everyone experienced, but no one talks about anymore. It's not that people forgot. I don't think anyone who lived through it could truly forget, but at some point, it became something we stopped discussing. It faded into the background of our lives. Like wallpaper, you stop noticing even though it's always there. I think about that sometimes. How we all carried the weight of it silently, separately, pretending we had moved on. Emily left for college when she was 18. She chose a school in Massachusetts, far enough away that she couldn't come home every weekend. I helped her pack. I drove her to campus. I helped her set up her dorm room, a small, plain space with cinder block walls and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. When it was time to leave, she hugged me briefly and said, "I'll be fine, Mom." I wanted to believe her. But as I drove away, watching her disappear in the rearview mirror, I felt a panic I hadn't expected. Not because I thought something bad would happen to her, but because I realized I had spent her entire childhood preparing her for danger. And I didn't know if I had prepared her for anything else. Had I taught her to be joyful, to be open, to trust people, or had I only taught her to be afraid? The question haunted me for months. Tom and I adjusted to the empty house. It was quieter than I had imagined. I'd walk past Emily's room and see her bed neatly made, her posters still on the walls, her books still on the shelf. Everything waiting for her to come back. But she didn't come back often. Winter break, summer, brief visits that felt more like checkpoints than homecomings. I told myself it was normal, that this was what happened when children grew up. They left. They built their own lives. But it felt like more than that. It felt like the distance between us had started long before she went to college. It had started years ago, in all the moments when I had been too tired, too worried, too distracted to really see her. And now it was too late. Tom retired when he was 62. Earlier than he had planned, he said he was ready, that he wanted to enjoy life while he still could. But I think the truth was that he was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. He had spent years carrying a tension he could never fully release, and it had worn him down. We talked about traveling, seeing places we had always wanted to see, Europe, Alaska, the national parks. But we never went. There was always a reason to delay. Money, health, uncertainty about the state of the world. And beneath all those reasons was something unspoken. We had lost the ability to imagine ourselves as people who did things like that anymore. We used to be people who made plans and believed in them, who bought plane tickets months in advance and didn't think twice. Now, we were people who hesitated, who waited, who let opportunities pass because it felt safer to stay home. I hated that we had become those people, but I didn't know how to change it. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the attic and found a box of old photographs, pictures from the late 90s. Emily as a toddler, Tom and me on vacation in California. The three of us at the beach, smiling, tan, carefree. I sat on the dusty attic floor and looked through them one by one. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Grief. Not for a person, but for a version of life that no longer existed. For a version of myself I barely recognized. In the photo I looked young. My face smile was real. I tried to remember what it had felt like to be that person. To move through the world without the weight I carried now. But I couldn't. The memory was too distant. Like trying to recall a dream. I put the photos back in the box and closed it. I didn't look at them again. Margaret passed away when she was 74. I found out from a former coworker who called to tell me. The funeral was small, just family and a few old friends. I went alone. Tom didn't feel up to it. He had been having trouble with his knees and didn't want to stand for long. I sat in the back of the chapel and listened as Margaret's daughter spoke about her mother. She talked about Margaret's kindness, her dedication to the library, her love of books, her quiet strength. But there was something missing from the eulogy, something unspoken. No one mentioned how much the world had changed during Margaret's lifetime. No one talked about what she had lived through. What she had witnessed, and I realized that this was how it would be for all of us. Our lives would be summarized in gentle, polite terms. Zared par the fear, the loss, the slow erosion of hope would be left out, because no one wants to talk about those things at a funeral. After the service, I stood outside the chapel for a while, watching people disperse, strangers to me. Margaret's family, her neighbors, people whose names I didn't know. I thought about all the small, invisible ways we had been shaped by what we had lived through, how it had changed the way we saw the world, the way we raised our children, the way we loved each other. And I wondered if anyone else thought about it the way I did, or if I was alone in this. Tom's health declined slowly. Nothing catastrophic, just the ordinary accumulation Gotwasi-Bakur. He started taking medication for his blood pressure, his cholesterol, his blood sugar. He spent most of his days in the living room, reading or watching television. Sometimes I'd sit with him. Other times I'd find things to do in other parts of the house just to feel like I was still useful. We didn't talk much. Not because we had nothing to say, but because after so many years together, most things didn't need to be said. One evening, he looked at me from his chair and said, "Do you ever wish we had done things differently?" I asked him what he meant. He said, "I don't know, traveled more, taken more risks, been less afraid." I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "I think we did the best we could with what we knew." He nodded, but I could see in his eyes that my answer hadn't satisfied him. Because the truth was, I did wish we had done things differently. I wished we had been braver. I wished we had held on to joy a little tighter. I wished we hadn't let fear make so many decisions for us, but I couldn't say that out loud. Because what good would it do? Emily got married when she was 29. A small wedding in Vermont, just close family and a few friends. She had met her husband, David, at work. He was kind, steady, practical. I liked him, but I also felt a sadness watching them together. Not because they weren't happy, but because their happiness felt careful, measured, like they were both holding something back, protecting themselves from a future disappointment they assumed was inevitable. I wondered if that was my fault, if I had taught Emily to love that way. During the reception, I danced with Tom. It was a slow song, something I didn't recognize. He held me close, and I rested my head on his shoulder. He whispered, "She be okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Later that night, back in our hotel room, I stood by the window and looked out at the dark Vermont hills. Tom was already asleep. I could hear his soft snoring from the bed. I thought about all the years that had passed since that September morning, all the things that had changed, all the things we had lost without even realizing we were losing them. And I thought about how strange it was that life just kept going, that the world kept turning, that people kept getting married and having children and making plans, even when everything felt uncertain. Maybe that was resilience. Or maybe it was just stubbornness. I didn't know anymore. Frank, the old mailman, died a few years ago. I saw his obituary in the local paper. He was 81. The obituary said he had loved his job, his family, and his community. I thought about what he had told me once, years ago, that he felt lucky to be part of people's lives in a small way. I wondered if he still felt lucky at the end, or if the world had taken that from him too. Tom and I are old now, properly old. He's 76, I'm 73. We move slowly. We forget things. We spend a lot of time sitting. Our house feels too big for just the two of us. Emily keeps suggesting we sell it and move into something smaller, a condo, an assisted living community. But I can't bring myself to leave. This house holds all the memories of the life we built. Emily's childhood, Tom's career, the dinners, the holidays, the quiet, ordinary moments that seem so unremarkable at the time, but now feel precious. If we leave, I'm afraid we'll lose those memories, that they'll fade even faster than they already are. So we stay, and the house creaks around us, and we grow older. Sometimes I lie in bed and think about you, Tom, of have. but to all of us, the whole country, the whole world. I think about how much has changed since that day in September. The wars, the division, the anger, the fear that never quite went away. And I think about how much we've lost that can't be quantified. The trust, the openness, the sense that tomorrow would be better than today. I don't know if we'll ever get that back. But I also think about the things that haven't changed. The sun still rises. People still fall in love. Children still laugh. Life continues. Even when it's hard. Maybe that's enough. Or maybe I'm just too old to expect anything more. Emily calls once a week. Usually on Sunday afternoons. We talk about small things. The weather, her job, David's parents, plans for the holidays. She never asks me how I'm really doing, and I never tell her. Because what would I say? That I'm tired, that I'm sad, that I miss a version of the world that doesn't exist anymore. She has her own life, her own worries. She doesn't need mine. So I tell her I'm fine, and she tells me she's fine. And we both pretend that fine is enough. Tom's memory is starting to go. Not severely, but enough that I notice. He forgets where he put his glasses. He asks me the same question twice in one conversation. He sometimes calls me by his mother's name. I don't correct him. I just answer to whatever name he uses. Because in the end, does it really matter? We've been together for 52 years. We've raised a daughter. We've survived loss and fear and the slow, grinding weight of time. If he forgets my name sometimes, it doesn't erase everything else. I still love him, even though we barely talk anymore, even though most of our days are silent. Love doesn't always look the way you think it will. Sometimes it's just sitting in the same room, breathing the same air, waiting for the day to end. One night, I had a dream. I was young again, standing in the airport with Emily, watching her browse the bookstore alone. The terminal was bright and open. People moved slowly. No one looked afraid. Tom was there too, younger, smiling. He put his arm around me and said, "Everything's going to be fine." And in the dream, I believed him. When Premier occupé, the room was dark, the house was quiet. I lay there for a long time, holding on to the feeling of the dream, the lightness, the ease. But eventually, it faded. And I was just an old woman in a dark room, remembering something that could never come back. Many people remember that time differently. I've noticed this over the years. In conversations with old friends, with neighbors, with people my age who lived through the same things I did. We all remember it. But we don't all remember it the same way. Some people talk about it with anger, about what was taken from us, about how the world became smaller, meaner, more divided. Others talk about it with a kind of pride, about resilience, about how we came together, about flags and unity and strength. And then there are people like me who don't talk about it much at all, not because we've moved on, but because we're still trying to understand what it meant, what it changed, what it left behind. I don't have neat conclusions. I don't have a moral to the story. I just have the memory of two different worlds. The one before and the one after. And the quiet ache of knowing I can never go back to the first one. For those who lived through it, memory becomes softer with age. Not kinder, but softer. The sharp edges dull. The details blur. What remains are impressions, feelings, the ghost of what was. I can't remember exactly what Emily looked like the day I picked her up from school. I can't remember what Margaret said to me that morning in the library. I can't remember the exact words Tom used when he finally called from Atlanta, but I remember the feelings, the tightness in my chest, the weight in my stomach, the sense that something fundamental had broken and could not be repaired. Those feelings haven't faded. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being unfair to the present. If I'm so focused on what was lost that I can't see what still remains. Because there are good things. There are still moments of beauty, of connection, of grace. Emily and David are talking about having a baby. She told me a few months ago, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure how I'd react. I told her I was happy for her. And I meant it, but I also felt afraid. Afraid of what kind of world she'd be bringing a child into. Afraid that her child would grow up the way Emily did, cautious, guarded, shaped by fear. I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and hugged her and told her she'd be a wonderful mother. Because what else could I say? The truth is too heavy to put on her shoulders. Tom and I celebrated our 53rd anniversary last month. We didn't do anything special, just dinner at home. Emily called to wish us well. We opened a bottle of wine and sat in the living room, the television on but muted. À some point, Tom looked at us and said, "We made it." Asked him what he wanted. He said, "Through everything. We made it." I nodded, because we admired we were together, still breathing. But I also thought about what we had lost along the way. Not just external things, but internal ones. The lightness, the hope, the easy faith in the future. Had we made it? Or had we just survived? I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. Life slowly changed after that day, but not everything disappeared. I think about love remened. Fear didn't erase love. It complicated it. It made it harder. But it didn't erase it. Tom still holds my hand when we walk, even though we don't walk far anymore. Emily still calls, even though the conversations are shorter than I'd like. People still stop to help when you need it, even though they're more guarded than they used to be. Kindness remained. Generosity remained. Laughter remained. It's just that all of these things require more effort now. More intention. You have to dig deeper to find them. They don't come as easily as they once did. I think about the street musician in Philadelphia, the one Tom and I saw playing guitar outside the restaurant, the little boy who stood and stared at him with wide eyes, the mother who smiled and let her son be curious. I wonder if moments like that still happen, if parents still let their children wander, if strangers still trust each other enough to share those small connections. Première up, they don't know. Because I haven't been back to the city in years. And when I try to imagine it now, all I can see is the way it was, not the way it is. Maybe that's my failure. Maybe I've let memory trap me. Maybe I've spent so much time looking backward that I've forgotten how to look forward. Or maybe I'm just old, and this is what happens when you get old. You live more in the past than in the present, because the past is where most of your life has already happened. There's a kind of grief in that realization, a grief that no one prepares you for. Emily asked me once, a few years ago, if I had any regrets. We were sitting in her apartment. She had just moved in with David. It was small but nice, clean, modern, full of IKEA furniture and framed prints of places they wanted to visit someday. I thought about her question for a long time. Then I said, I regret not being braver. She looked surprised. She said, "You've always seemed brave to me." I shook my head. No, I was afraid. I let fear make too many decisions. I think I passed that fear on to you. And I'm sorry for that. She was quiet for a moment. Pretentious, I don't blame Ma's right. But that'd make me feel better. Because intention doesn't erase impact. I taught her to be careful. Toba kosiukspenja. And in doing so, I think I taught her to expect less from life than she deserved. That's the regret I carry. Not something I did, but something I failed to do. I failed to show her that life could still be open, still be joyful, still be full of possibility, because I stopped believing it myself. Tom's health has gotten worse in the past year. Nothing dramatic. Just a sline easily asleep mort. Some days he doesn't get out of his chair at all. The doctor says it's just age. That there's nothing specifically wrong. Just the accumulation of years and wear. But I can see it in his eyes. He's tired. Not just physically. He's tired of being alive. I don't say that to him, but I know it's true. Because I feel it, too, sometimes. That bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying weight for too long. We don't talk about dying. We don't talk about what happens next. We just exist, day by day, in the quiet space between living and letting go. I used to be afraid of death, but I'm not anymore. What I'm afraid of now is forgetting. That, in the years after I'm gone, no one will remember what it was like before. That the world I knew will be erased completely, as if it never existed. Maybe that's selfish. Maybe it doesn't matter, but it matters to me. I want someone to remember that airports used to be open, that people used to trust each other, that children used to ride their bikes freely, that the world used to feel lighter, not because it was objectively better. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I'm romanticizing it. But it felt different. And that difference meant something. It meant something to me. Last week, I found an old photograph in a drawer. It was from the summer of 2000. Tom and I were standing on a beach somewhere. I can't remember where. Maybe North Carolina. Maybe Virginia. We were smiling. Our arms were around each other. The sun was setting behind us, casting everything in gold. I stared at that photo for a long time, and I tried to remember what it had felt like to be that person, to stand on a beach with my husband and believe that life was good, that the future was bright, that nothing terrible was waiting just around the corner. But I couldn't access that feeling anymore. It was like looking at a stranger. I put the photo back in the drawer and closed it. Maybe someday Emily will find it. Maybe she'll look at it and wonder who those people were, what their lives were like, what they believed in. Maybe she'll see the lightness in our faces and think we had it easy. Or maybe she'll see the truth, that we were just people, ordinary people, living ordinary lives in a moment of history that felt, for a brief time, safe. And then it wasn't, and we spent the rest of our lives adjusting to that loss. I don't know what happens after we die. I've never been particularly religious, but sometimes I let myself imagine it. And in my imagination, there's a place where all the lost things go. Not just people, but moments, feelings, versions of the world that no longer exist. And maybe in that place, I'll find it again. The airport terminal with the bookstore and the children running between the seats. The neighborhood where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. The restaurant in Philadelphia with the street musician outside. Maybe I'll find myself there too. The younger version of me. The one who sang while she cooked. The one who made plans without hesitating. The one who believed tomorrow would be better than today. Maybe that version of me is still there, somewhere, waiting. I'd like to think so. Tom fell asleep in his chair an hour ago. I'm sitting across from him, watching him breathe. His chest rises and falls slowly, steadily. His hands are folded in his lap. He looks peaceful. I hope he's dreaming of something good. The house is quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me uncomfortable. But I've gotten used to it. Outside, the streetlights are starting to flicker on. I can see them through the window. One by one, they illuminate the empty street. No children on bikes, no neighbors walking dogs, just light and darkness and the space between. I think about Emily, about the baby she and David are planning to have, about what kind of world that child will grow up in. I hope it's a better one than the world Emily inherited. I hope it's lighter, easier, more open. But I don't know if hope is enough anymore. Maybe it never was. Or maybe hope is all we ever have. I think about Margaret, about what she said on her last day at the library. I don't think we'll ever get that back. That feeling. She was right. We won't, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not supposed to get it back. Maybe we're just supposed to remember it, to carry it with us, to let it shape us without consuming us. Maybe that's what survival looks like. Not returning to what was, but learning to live with what is. I look at Tom again. His face is soft in sleep, vulnerable, human, after everything, after all the years, after all the fear and loss and slow erosion of hope. We're still here. We're still breathing. We're still together. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough, because there's nothing else. Just this, just us, just now. The streetlights glow outside. The house is quiet. Tom sleeps. And I sit here, holding all the memories I can't speak aloud. All the grief I can't name. All the love I don't know how to express anymore. I sit here, an old woman in a dark room, remembering a world that no longer exists, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The loss. The longing. The strange, quiet gratitude for having lived through something, even if it broke me in ways I'll never fully understand. Life slowly changed after that day. But not everything disappeared. I'm still here. And for now, that's all I know. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. That way, you'll be notified whenever a new story like this is shared here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment. You can share if you've experienced something similar, what this story evoked in you, or even where you're watching from. Sometimes, writing a few words is the first step in realizing you're not alone.